We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Good afternoon. I'm Bill Carell, and along with my two co-hosts, Mr. Ken Caputo and Miss Jan Jeremias, we're going to entertain you and edify you and hopefully give you some things to think about over the next hour. And how I know this is because we don't know what we're going to talk about when we get on every single week. And as being the convener, I get to toss some words out. And if folks want to talk about that, we do. The intention is to get into the domain of empowerment, and what that means is taking a situation that may be a personal experience of not being able to take action when you know you want to, ought to, and it just isn't there for you, to make the choice to be in a position where you are powerful and to be empowered, through your own thought choices. So, in general, I guess that's how it goes. But what we do is pretty much like popcorn. We share some ideas, and then as the ideas blossom and bloom, sometimes it goes a particular direction for a little while and then comes back around again. But it's always fun. And we kind of know if we're getting it done with each other, that there'll be value here for you when you watch this podcast down the road. So, again, if we're getting our job done around here, we're giving each other and ourselves goosies every once in a while. And the word we're going to talk about today, again, I'm tossing out there, for your approval, truth and narrative. And I think we can go a lot of different directions with that. What do you folks say?
Yeah.
That could be an interesting can of worms to open right there.
Right there. I know.
Could be delicious. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah.
hmm
So while you are pondering that, I will do Lisa's job and get some definitions up here for us. Okay.
Yeah, I was just doing that.
Cool. So when I think of truth, um, I mean, this goes back to like the earliest times when I had language. And to me, the simplest definition of truth is something that can independently be verified objectively, by any person using the same information. And a narrative is like story time. There's a conversation going on, and the conversation has limits and bounds, and it's intended to produce some sort of a thread or a string to either, um, shall we say, inform or possibly misinform or whatever. But the truth is something that stands on its own and does not crumble under intense scrutiny. It is the same as viewed from all points of view. So did that buy you enough time, Jan, to get the real definition up in front of us?
Oh, okay. I was listening to what you were saying, and I, easily distracted here.
I understand shiny things.
I was so first thing it says the quality or state of being true, that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality, a fact or belief that is accepted as true
Hmm.
is what is offered up first.
That's an interesting little addition to the back there. Something that's accepted as true. What's that line out of Billie Jean by Michael Jackson? Till the lie becomes the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. It just brings to mind that somebody was telling me that a lot of the stuff over the last 20 years that was available on the internet has been massaged. And that includes definitions to words in some cases, facts, removing access to some historical data that might have been there in the year 2000 but is no longer searchable. Which the really cool part of that is that with the advent of AI, Google and other search engines are really losing an awful lot of their control of the narrative, if you will. And where certain things have been designed, not just in this country, but worldwide, to go a particular direction. And this is again, another narrative that may or may not have any truth associated with it. But our information system and our access to language and our ability to go and discover things for ourselves just by having questions has to necessarily lead us all to the same conclusions, so that since everything is perfectly in alignment with everything else, so the narrative goes, then we must come to the same conclusion. And in many times that conclusion is a completely different answer than we would have resolved 20, 40, 50, 100 years ago. And the neat part of that is, where can you go and corroborate or fact check the internet? How about printed books?
Hmm.
That's a really cool thing to do. And I advise you, the next time you hear some sort of a historical statement in a YouTube video, I don't know, it might even be this one, go and see if you can find something that either supports or refutes, or maybe gives you more, mass and dimension in terms of the information that's being offered. But that's kind of a cool thing. Somebody was saying something in a meeting, that some inquiry in Congress or something, and I was listening in on it, and I said, you know what? That doesn't sound right. I actually don't believe that that's how that thing went down or what was ultimately decided. And I won't get into the details of what it was, just so I can generally be right in my narrative here. Um, what I went and did is I went back and I looked at an Encyclopedia Britannica that was printed in the 1930s. And I looked up the very topic that they were talking about. And it was something that happened in the 1800s. Absolutely a different story. Completely changed. However, I did look it up on the internet and I used Google first. And what I found was almost word for word exactly what they said in that meeting. Now I wonder which came first, the Google or the representation of that being factual and true. It had to do with the legal system in the 1800s. So with that said, there's also another big controversy that's coming out right now with the introduction of AI, where the search algorithms that are being used with the major search engines are not respected by AI. So, and there's further messing with this that goes on, and that is that AI is not able to discern factual data or information from stuff that's not true. So I don't know if you've looked into it a little bit, or the whole Chat GPT. We're up to 4, and there's going to be a new 5 that's coming out. I spent a lot of time looking into that over the last 3 or 4 months. When I first became aware of it in November and December. Very cool. And the tools are absolutely amazing and fabulous. And at the end of the day, whatever it produces is probably no better than what your 8 or 9-year-old can come up with story time, right? It still isn't something you can hang your hat on and say, been verified, et cetera, et cetera. But the neat part of it is it doesn't look to the data that's available in where like a Google search engine would. So you at least have a chance to possibly introduce some new information that wasn't necessarily findable under a normal search engine, which I think is kind of cool. And will it make us any more confident with what we hear as being the truth or being a narrative?
Starting to feel like, in and of itself, truth can be overrated.
That sounds very Orwellian.
Yeah. Well, just from the perspective of, if it's coupled with a narrative, as humans, because of our level of ignorance and confirmation bias and all those kind of things, what we are going to choose to see as truth is going to align with a narrative. So it feels like what's more important is context. And so it's like the focus not being on what the fact is, or what you think the fact is, or what's where the fact came from. It's like, what's the relevance of that? So like, you think empirical truth, like gravity, right? And some people right now are so confused by this whole thing. They've decided gravity doesn't exist either, that's made up. So, but for argument's sake, we'll say that that's something that, you know we'll say that that's an empirical truth that exists. For some people, they leverage that truth and they make something that defies it and flies through the air. you know Other people build something high and create a railing so that you're safe from the effects of it. It's not about, so you can argue all day long or question who recognized it, how it works, all that kind of stuff, but then you're missing the point of, what is the result that you're trying to produce? Like, how does this serve you? So, and I think that looking at, whether it be politically or anything like that, wherever you see polarization, truth becomes a weapon that they're using to better support and convince people of their narrative, instead of data that we use in a context to create an outcome. Y- you know so, and if you're willing to have the conversation and deal with the repercussions of being clear on the outcome you're looking for, knowing that people may not agree with it, now truth just becomes something that you're using to support that. you know but a lot of times we don't want people to know what our actual outcomes are, because we know they're not going to like it.
What's interesting in what I'm hearing, what you're saying, is that the word truth is fungible. Uh,
Hmm.
in in as much as you can leave out truth and overemphasize so-called truth, and that's more along the lines of the narrative descriptor, as we were saying before. But there's also this thing that I think is very powerful that you said, where any statement can be a Rorschach test.
Hmm.
And it's been proven over and over and over again that when people read something, they don't all internalize it and process it with the same meaning. So this can be across different cultural lines. It can be, different nationalities. The so-called exact same words being printed in Latin or French or Italian or English or Hebrew, they don't land the same way. And that person, as you said, the training and confirmation bias and just you know the bandwidth of being able to listen and hear the words with any intensity, uh, to an inarticulate listener, there's a very thin communication there. To an articulate listener who's very schooled in language and linguistics, there are lots of different ways to read every single sentence, all of which can be, not mutually exclusively true, but all be true at the same time.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting how, I mean, that why does it matter to the person who's interpreting it? So, and the fact that, like, if you talk to two people and one believes the earth is round and the other believes the earth is flat, they will both tell you that that is true. And there's nothing you're going to say that's going to change them from their central belief that that is true. And they will give you all of the evidence of why that is true. And they'll think the other one is not seeing the truth. You hear it all the time right now on social media: wake up, you'll see. If you were awake, you're asleep. But the problem is everybody is asleep and telling each other that they're awake and they need to be awake. you know so what's the What's the reason that you feel the earth is flat? Why does that need to be true to you? What is, and maybe it's because you lack trust in government. And that's really what it comes down to, is you believe you're being lied to, and that is upsetting to you. And this is the thing that anchors that belief and gives you a sense of control, something you can debate people on, instead of a vague unknown. You know what I'm saying? So it's
I think the word, Ken, that when you said controlled, I think of it makes people feel secure is the word that comes to
Mhm.
my mind, because I think people nowadays especially feel very um, vulnerable and very at risk, like they're not quite sure what to believe in, so to speak, and so they need something to kind of grasp onto,
Mhm.
and that feeling gives them some sort of security.
Yeah.
And the word true, when I truth, when I was thinking to myself, like, I always say, what's true to me? Like, what is my truth and what is true to me? So I take it much more individual. And maybe because then it not only has to do with, and what's true to me beyond the narrative, beyond what I tell myself to be true, or the story that I tell myself, which is usually colored in some way
Mhm.
by my experience and by my life happening and whatever. And there's something about what is my truth or what's true to me, which is deeper beyond all the narrative that I've told myself for my whole life.
And yet
Which,
it's all the same thing.
right, it is
You
all the
can't
same
separate.
thing.
Right.
Right, right.
You're in this soup, and it gives you some comfort to say my truth. Okay, this is
Right.
relatively a new sentence. There wasn't any my truth when I was 20 years old. There was the truth. Okay, and everybody had pretty damn sure that they knew the truth, right? Which is where the bar fights started. So the really interesting part now, and this is taught at university. This isn't just like somebody out there in the world made it up. They wanted to give people comfort, to be discordant with cultural norms. And so the introduction of, if this doesn't feel good to you, then you have a moral responsibility to stand up and rail against it. That's kind of interesting. You have the um you have the obligation to be offended because this does not agree with your truth. Now, is that an interesting thing to plant in people's minds? That's kind of an interesting worm to have working in the background for the rest of a student's life. And what is that intended to produce? What's the desired outcome for loading somebody up like that? Now, Jan, your truth is something that's got thousands of hours of experience behind it, and probably more time studying and more time looking at things where there is potential for discordance and for things to not agree with each other, where your critical thinking that you were armed with at an early age allows you to say, as Ken and I would say, with the three bullshit detectors, you know does this make sense, to my head, my heart, and my gut, and when those three things are not in perfect alignment and one of them says, I don't think so, Tim, then the other two get to go to the back of the room and wait to see if there's more information coming. But I love the notion of my truth right now. How does that do for you on an exam?
Well, I think that's the other thing that's interesting about this is if you look at, I think sometimes we forget, like if you were to go back to the 50s and where we were kind of in an industrialized age, you needed, like, you went in the factory and you put the widget in the gidget, and you had security, as much as anyone could, in that job and in that role. And it was very, like, it was kind of clearer, just because that was how society was functioning. That was what was allowing us socioeconomically to create some kind of a cohesive thing. And then you shifted into the age of communication, which change the rules. So now those things aren't any less true, but the context has shifted, you know? And like now you're in an age of really, we've left kind of the age of information. We're heading into the age of consciousness, where now people are becoming self-aware and they're starting to have very different conversations that weren't really relevant, 70 years ago. So again, have whatever truth you want. I think that the interesting thing is if the focus is on awareness of the impact that's having internally and externally, that allows you to make decisions. So, so if people are told in college, rail against injustice, that doesn't mean that they have to do that through their whole life. It means that it was an idea they've been exposed to. And if they've developed self awareness,
Yeah,
they
but
can start to question whether that fits for them.
yeah, but the narrative that you're espousing is the narrative that says that all people are intellectually capable of having the same notion of my truth that a Jan would, for example. And
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
when I hear Jan say my truth, I hear it more like a Stephen Covey moral compass that has been put there through enough successes and failures in life to have some adult view of the world, as opposed to when I said that you should rail against and that you should, immediately objectify as an insult and an offense somebody who says something that is not in accord with your truth. Okay, not anything other than that. You know what I mean? You hear something that you don't agree with, it's now your responsibility as an activist to get out there and do something about it and change it right now.
Well, I think there could be a place for that, and there could also be a time where that is taken too far. I think it's like everything, it's a spectrum. So what I'm saying is, I don't think it requires intelligence. It requires attention to just notice the impact of the decisions you're making and be brave enough to change if the result doesn't align with what you see as being true. So, I mean, I know people that they became activated, for example, during Black Lives Matter, and they took it too far. And, and I distanced myself from them. I believed in what they were doing, but they took it too far. And then they kind of realized, based on the fact that people that they trusted and who they were friends with weren't that way anymore. So they adjusted the behavior back. And, and they're no less passionate for it. They they reorganize around the result they were trying to produce, which is being respectful and advocating for what they saw as injustice, but then, course correcting, and I wonder if maybe that's we've done that since we were cave people. Like, if you're starving, you had to course correct to figure out how to get food, it's like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'd like to rewind if I could, Jan. Would you, since I kind of jumped on the words that you said and not your meaning of those words, I'm more interested in when you say my truth, what's behind that for you? And I know somebody who's put some thought into it. It's not like parroting something you heard somewhere, and that's my expectation of where it comes from you.
I think I look at it, or I feel like it comes from a space of if I can get beyond the stories I tell myself, what is the what are my root feelings in something? Like what I can say I feel it in my heart. Like what is the world like beyond all those stories and beyond all the outside influences that we're exposed to on a instantaneous basis these days, because
Yeah.
it's available all the time. And so it's something far deeper beyond anything um, that might be able to be described to someone. It's like, how do I operate on the basis level? That's the way I feel. Like that's my truth.
Are you able to articulate in any moment what your truth is, or is it something that's kind of dynamic and kind of ebbs and flows in terms of your noticing it, or when it seems even important for you to acknowledge that there is your truth.
I think there are points in my life where that's the place let's say I try to navigate from.
Yeah.
And there are points when life gets challenging where I have to go back and consciously make myself aware of what that truth is for me. Because you know, I've deviated too far off of, let's say, who I who I who I truly am. And sometimes it's the realization of what and I know we're not supposed to be happy and content and joyful all the time, but sometimes it's as simple as going back and saying, okay, what brings me joy?
Back to that question. That's exactly where in terms of listening to Ken and you both and kind of overlaying them, there's this whole aspect of a human being having the intention of growing, you know?
Mhm.
Like I'm not a cooked human being at the age of 19 or 20. There's always this opportunity that if I can install a couple of subroutines, like the inquisitive curiosity, the nature of seeking out wonder in the world, and that openness to being corrected by new information once I've had a chance to verify that it does, at least I can tell if it's on the good or the evil side of the graph here. And the kind of the neat thing, that I for people who go through a period of time of being told what is important and what they should believe, and then being pretty much indoctrinated in that way of thinking, how do they get that curiosity? How do they get that openness, to having new information or to change their point of view because it's been updated, like there's an opportunity to grow in this moment, which when I hear you speak, Jan, that's where I say you're coming from all the time, is to be mindful when you're asleep and notice that you're asleep and wake up, not because somebody told you to, but because what's going on inside of you says, Jan, you're not fully present right now. You might want to just check in and see what's going on in your life.
There's something on a rudimentary, a very, very core kind of like, I want to say, almost rudimentary level just does not feel right. And
Hmm.
I'll just use this as a personal example. So I grew up like every normal kid. And when I was 10, my parents, we were all Jewish and traditional, which was, how do I describe it? We kept all the holidays, but we didn't keep the Sabbath. We just kind of went around and it was very a part of our lives. And when I was 10, my parents became Orthodox. And so we didn't drive on the Sabbath anymore. They kind of segregated themselves. So we wouldn't, and I didn't, as a 10-year-old, I did not understand giving up my friends because they weren't Jewish and religious. Like that didn't make sense to me because they were still the same people. Like, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I was like, well, what's the difference between now and yesterday? They were my friends yesterday. Why aren't they my friends today? And something on a very, very core level just felt wrong about that. It just felt wrong. I was just like, this just doesn't feel right. Like, I loved that person yesterday. How can you tell me I can't love that person today? Like, so I kind of had to go through this whole soul searching kind of way for me to navigate the world, trying to keep both worlds kind of in me, and knowing. And basically, like, that's what I consider a truth. Like, at a root level, I just said to myself, something about this is wrong. Like, yeah. And so I think that, sometimes it's those strong feelings of like, you just tell yourself, like, maybe I can't even describe this to people. Maybe I can't articulate it if somebody were to ask, but something about this just feels totally off. And that wasn't a story anybody told me. No, it was just something that just didn't feel right.
Did your parents have a conversation or a discussion about what changed for them between yesterday and today?
Years later, I asked them, But I think as a 10-year-old, I don't even know that I knew to ask. I mean, I might have asked, but they also might not have known how to answer it
Yeah.
in a way that I could have understood. And right now, I mean, I know I did ask years later. And it took a long time for me to come to terms with that because I was religious for a lot of years because they wanted me to be religious. And I remember the experience of finally thinking to myself, I don't want to, I felt like such a hypocrite because I didn't really believe it and I was doing it. And I remember sitting there, and friends of my parents had a son who went and left Orthodoxy, and they literally sat Shiva as if he had died. And I remember I was like 19 when that happened, or 18. And I thought to myself, like, that was so horrible to me. I thought to myself, well, if I leave, then I'm going to be all alone in the world. Like, I'll have no family. And
Yeah.
so that influenced the way I acted for many years. And it took a lot of strength for me to sit there and say, okay, well, I can't be, this isn't who I am. And I can't live a life that I don't like. I can't do it because I don't believe it. And, you know,
That's
so I,
extremely powerful what you're saying right now. All of that worked in your life and gave you a very small space to operate in because you're always bumping up against what's the consequence of my not play acting or whatever, however you reconciled it to yourself. And we all go through that. Rarely does anyone in any type of a situation have the intestinal fortitude to just stand up and go, this ain't right. I'm not doing it anymore. While all their friends are going forward with whatever that was. I think that's
yeah,
an amazing way to demonstrate the difference between truth and narrative.
thank you. And not to say that, and I'm not saying I'm the only one, and other people have life situations which are similar,
Yeah,
maybe different stories or different things happen, but they go through the same experiences. But for me, I think it was very hard because I was ostracized and separated for many years
yeah,
because of that. And, it was only, and it's as I got older and I, kind of had the real feel like the real dialogue where what you see is what you get. Like, this is who I am.
yeah.
And this is who I am. And if you love me, you'll take it. And if you don't, then, I can't do anything about it. But yeah, it's a really interesting place to navigate. It's kind of an interesting feeling to be, so I think that that's what truth was to me. Like, I just, and that was the example. Like, people were people to me. There was
Sure.
no label, it's like there were either good people or people who acted with consciousness, awareness, like kindness. And so that's why, I think it's the Dalai Lama who always says that kind, kindness is my religion, or my religion is kindness.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I felt.
Well, I
It's
think
interesting. Oh,
you're demonstrating where being conscious in an area that really matters, fundamental human relationship, which is the lifeblood of everything we do every day of our existence. So go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
I was going to say it's interesting noticing how people respond when one person's truth is perceived as a threat to their truth.
Yeah.
And what are they going to do with that now? Who are they going to be in that moment when the jar gets shaken? Who are they going to be? So I think that's a lot of what you were experiencing, Jan, I would imagine.
Well, it was interesting because for many years I used to ask myself, like, if I believe like you're born into a family, like kind of thing. I used to ask myself, like, why was I born into this family? Being
Mm.
like in my extended family, I'm pretty much, at my mother's side, I'm pretty much the only one who's not religious out
Yeah.
of everybody. So I sat there and I turned to a friend of mine one day who used to tell me I had like, because I still wanted that connection, that family meant a lot to me. And I wasn't willing to sever that tie because sometimes they would treat me really badly. And she would say, I can't believe like you just haven't totally distanced yourself from them. And so it was just I said to my friend, I think I was born there to teach them tolerance,
Mhm.
like to like basically put in their face the fact that there were other people in the world that were not like them. as hard as it is sometimes.
Yeah.
And that might be a story I tell myself, and that makes but that's that was something that I thought about through the years. Like, why was I all of a sudden put in this situation?
There's so much invisible background in every single life's experience, given where your parents came from, and
Oh, absolutely.
given what happened in Europe, 80 years ago, and what happened in Spain 200-300 years ago, and what happened in Egypt, 2,000-3,000 years ago. There's this whole I can't say anything from personal experience because I haven't had this sort of an epiphany where it seemed like my survival depended on being part of and being in lockstep with the rest of a flock, if you will. And I can definitely see that your parents, at whatever age they were at, literally got religion. The choice of orthodoxy is one of the neat things that goes on until you become orthodox. You can't undo that. This is how it's going to be from now on, or shunned is a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's interesting as I've navigated this whole thing with my father and going down and caring for my parents. And
Yeah.
um, I think my family looks at me differently because I think they realize that, one of the true um that, as I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she's a rabbi, and she said to me, "You have to look, if you look at the 10 commandments, what is one of the commandments? I will honor them, my mother and my father." And she said, "I think your family saw that, maybe I don't do a lot of things, but that tie and that, like, I took that, I take that very seriously and very consciously." And so it was just I think it's been very interesting for them um, to see someone who's not like them, actually, quote unquote, not like them on a
Yeah.
deeper level. More like, thank you for picking up the kitty again. Just-
Been a big part of this podcast so far.
yes, he
They
has.
need attention today.
She has.
As you around what looks like a handrail over there, it looks like stairs going down, but
Yep. Yeah. No, she's always into something.
Laughing, sorry. So yeah.
so until you got the enlightenment and could ask questions about how and why things happened, you see how most people just go through their lives bumping into walls and bumping into other people, and most of the time just being, sort of not quite miserable. And having these little moments of random joy that pop up with no real way to point and click, to make that come into your life right now, like simply because. And there's a neat thing that I've heard many really people that I respect say this: if you take 10 minutes a day and dedicate that to prayer, anything that you consider to be prayer, it doesn't even necessarily have to be to a higher power. I mean, it can be, to Gaia and the universe and, all that. If you take that time to accept your humble position in your life and to be thankful for it, that changes the color and the flavor of your life for the rest of the day until it's gone. But if you do it every single day, at least you have a period of time, before that sort of runs out of juice. It's almost,
It's
yeah,
funny. I think about so in martial arts there's two skills that are equally important. One is the ability to root and the other is the ability to move. And if you try to root all the time, eventually you're going to run up into something that's going to move you. But if you try to move all the time, eventually you're going to get moved to where you don't want to be. So it's understanding and getting skillful at both of those things. So going all the way back to, let's say, advocacy, there's time where you have to take a stand. It's like, this is what is true for me, and I'm not budging from this until it's time to move. you know so so it's, and I think again, it's kind of like, I think for a lot of us from when we're kids, and this is multi-generational, it's just, here's the surfboard, paddle out there, here come the waves, deal with it. It's not the waves' fault, it's not our fault, it's not the surfboard's fault. We just aren't skillful at it. So, and we're not intention in being skillful. So instead, we're trying to understand the wave, or we're angry at our parents for not teaching us how to surf, or we're looking at the surfboard saying, if I had a better surfboard, I could deal with this. So it's all personal, and it's all outward facing instead of, how do I become skillful at this? What are the components to that? Who could be my teacher? How could I be my own teacher? And the funny thing is, those tiny waves all of a sudden are nothing. You barely even notice them, because you've learned to hold your center. And over time, you start to look forward to bigger and bigger waves. So now someone challenges what's true for you. And instead of being afraid of that, you can embrace it, because it's just going to be an interesting wave to surf, you know?
Well, it's a neat thing because there's a whole culture of philosophy around surfboarding. If you go
Mhm.
back and you look at the nature of the Beat Generation in California, and all of these kids that took up surfing and where they went to kind of figure out what their lives were all about, and all of the whole um noticing that, by the way, if I'm afraid of the waves, it's not the waves I'm afraid of. It's either coming from my past or some fear about a future that's generated from another time, but I'm not mindful right now. And my goal in this moment is to be absolutely one with this moment as each moment unfolds. And the nearest that I can come in describing what that might be like for me in my experience was skydiving. I want you to know, for the first 3 or 4 seconds after I rolled out the side of that plane with this little capuchin monkey on my back, the skydive master, who weighed half as much as I did, um, this is a bad idea. And then all of a sudden, for the next 60 seconds, I had no thought. I had no thought whatsoever. Just the wind misshapening, my cheeks and all this kind of stuff flapping. I could feel, just holy mackerel. And after I landed, I said, I can't remember a time in my entire life. Maybe birth was the last time I had that feeling, you know. And the most amazing part of it is that if you really are truly in a moment and you're trying to do the Richard Simmons deal a meal and put another card in place for what you've got right now, the answer is choose what you got. Bring it. Let's have some fun here. Yeah. Is that all you got? Right. Come on. Oh, yeah. And each moment, it just is coming right back to being mindful again.
Yeah, I think there's also some acceptance of impermanence that can lead to unnecessary resistance. I mean, when you're surfing, every time you step on the board, maybe the last time. And maybe it's because you can't do it anymore, or a shark eats you, or the wave was too big and you hit your head on a rock. But it's inherent, and if you don't surf, it's still impermanent. Like, at some point the last breath will come. So, and it's
Yeah.
just interesting. I think that, as I look at a lot of, the situations where, going all the way back to truth and narrative, it's, if they get this, you're going to lose that, and that's bad. So we got to keep that from happening. You're going to lose it. It's just a matter of when. It's not an if. you know Either you're going to lose it because you're going to die, or you're going to lose it because the world's going to change, or, it's just, so there's so much caught up in trying to fix things that are unfixed, rooting at the wrong time, you know, and then other people are moving at the wrong time. They're moving too fast. So, and they're like, they're too progressive, let's say, so, where they're moving for the sake of moving, instead of recognizing when there's an opportunity to take a stand and kind of rest in that. and look around you, instead of just stimulating, feeling the stimulation of more movement. Sometimes you just got to float and wait for the next wave. That's okay, you know?
My high school football coach always used to say, if you play not to get hurt, you will.
Yep.
So your attention has to be on executing and giving your best, physical and mindful, smart thinking, smart actions, smart moves. And there's no room for injury thinking in that whatsoever. If you play to not get hurt, you definitely will.
That is true. The best way to run into a tree when you're racing a mountain bike is to focus on the tree. It's
All of a sudden it gets really real, doesn't
guaranteed.
it?
Oh yeah.
Oh, it's so interesting as you're, because I focus, some of the most challenging of yoga poses are the balancing poses where, and how it's such a, like, can you speak to this? It's like such a fine line between thinking about it too much and you think about it so much that you can't balance. Like you think about it, you're trying to do everything you've ever heard about how someone who balances does a good job. It's all running in your head, and you're like, okay, well, if I engage this and I stand this way and I, recruit this muscle and I kind of relax
Mhm,
here, and your brain gets so involved that there's no possible way.
mhm.
And and then the days where I would get up and think to myself, I'm exhausted today, I really can't do anything, and then I would stand and I would nail it because I was just too tired to even think about
Yeah.
it. I was too tired, and it would just automatically, everything would just kind of like fire and go into place, and it was so automatic, it was so inherent that it wasn't, that's just the way it was. It was just that it's the day that when your brain gets so involved.
Yeah, and it's
What
funny
was
how it's like it's the letting go that uh, reveals to you, where the balance actually is.
Exactly.
landmark education in the early years, especially right after Werner left the United States to go hide in Russia. Uh, what they had is this thing called the sixth day. And they took pictures of people on day one, coming in with no training and no experience and all the rest of this sort of thing. And then each day there were a series of different challenges. And one of them was to run a mile as fast as you can. And so you can see, that's going to be like a range of different ways of executing that. And then another one is rappelling down the side of a cliff on a controlled line. And the really cool thing is that watching some videos of people standing up there giving all the reasons why they could not step off. And then the line was always the same. I understand. Please step off now. I understand. Please step off now. I understand. Please step off now. And then when they stepped off, they reported it was the coolest thing they ever did in their entire life. But they were arguing against it like vehemently. I'm going to die if I do this, that sort of thing. And I know we get ourselves into those positions all the time, and we just don't notice that they're just thought distortions that at the moment, or we want to survive the moment without doing the thing. You know what I mean? And there's no way to survive the moment without doing the thing. If the thing is the thing you got to do, you got to just say, okay, I'm stepping off. Here I go.
Well,
Whee!
I think when I think about, let's say my decision to just sort of like leave what I was doing and be true, my truth, was this feeling that if I didn't, I was going to lose myself. That and that was the feeling I had. I remember, if I don't stand up for who I am and what I believe or what's true for me, then I'm lost. Like I've lost myself. And so when Ken was talking about losing, I was thinking, yes, it is inevitable that we lose everything, that we do die. But that was the feeling. And I think of the time I repelled. And so I went mountaineering in the Northern Cascades at one point,
Yeah.
and we went, we were using picks. I mean, and I was hiking and everything, and we on a glacier, and we hit a thunderstorm on the top of the mountain. And the guide was like, basically, we have to repel off and we have to repel off now. Because if we don't go down now, the likelihood of us getting struck by lightning is quite high. And so I remember there was no choice. It was kind of like when I left. It was like this feeling, okay, if I want to live, I better jump.
But you know what? What you said is so perfect. We always have this quantifiable, definable, reportable identity. Like it's more of a weather report than anything else. And you absolutely do have to die to grow. You have to be, you have to let your self of this moment be gone to be the self you are in the next moment, having accomplished something.
And one of my favorite books is a book called Broken Open by Elizabeth Lesser.
Yep.
And at one point she calls, and I think she's quoting somebody, but she talks about what she calls the Phoenix process, is the fact that, Phoenix basically burns up so that it can be reborn.
Yep.
And that feeling of,
Yeah, there's a whole technology of breaking one's self up. And in terms of being a full court active liver, like somebody whose life is always about exploration and finding that next unexplored moment that is worth getting out of bed for and becoming excited about every single day. The notion of having this firm self that you went to sleep with last night be absolutely destroyed and replaced with the new self, and in many cases that just becomes like the highest high that anybody can have. And I've had several people that have gotten into big time trouble, especially rollerblading and stuff like that. Like there's some new thing they got to do today, and at some point, it either gets them in the hospital or they decide that was too scary for me, I'm going to put some back, and the skates are going in the closet for a week or so.
I think it's very interesting that when we talk about it, I think about a yoga practice, and what is the last pose you do is corpse pose. Is because the whole idea that when you get up afterwards and you like that first pushing of the hands into the ground when you go to sit up again, is that whole idea of you being reborn again. And, every time you get up off your practice, you are not the same as when you sat down.
The really neat part of this conversation is folks that are not familiar with anything that we're talking about as far as practices are concerned. What we're really discussing is how the practices are intended to interrupt your beliefs, simply because a belief is an unchallenged thought that you're unwilling to let go of. And I guess, the last time we looked it up, a belief is in many cases without factual or truthful data. It's something that someone whose belief is so strong couldn't prove them out of it. There's no proof that that belief will make it disappear. And in many cases, it'll actually cement the belief more. So people who are interested in breaking up their belief system on a daily basis to get more out of living, as opposed to more suffering or more, thinking about whatever it is that's not working in their life and that sort of thing. This is that whole bring me back to being that inquisitive child and allow me the joy and the wonder of experiencing something newly for the first time every time I choose. Not everybody's
So
up for that game.
yeah, it's kind of funny. I've been playing with this little theory lately that I don't think I've really talked about this out loud, but I'll share it with you guys. So it's an emotion to skepticism ratio. So basically, when when what's coming at you evokes strong emotion for a reason that's outside of yourself, and it's on both sides, so intense joy or intense fear or anger, the level of skepticism that I approach that with, like the amount of critical I look at it, is based on the degree of emotion that they're attempting to provoke. So, so if like you see this in supplements, you will die if you don't have this nutrient, and here's how we've learned to package it and sell it so that you don't die. I have a lot of skepticism about that, but if it's Peter T on his podcast, and he's saying, hey, there's some new research, some peer-reviewed research about this nutrient, and this has happened in mice. I don't know. I'm testing some things. They're just having an exploratory conversation where they're not triggering you into some hope or fear that's disproportionate.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious, like I'll listen more openly than I will if they're just pushing a lot of emotion. So, so I've been listening to politicians this way, and it's really interesting. There are some that have kind of a reasoned, measured way of explaining their position, and there's others who are attacking, they're insulting, they're rage farming, all of that kind of stuff. And it's interesting, the more when you apply skepticism to them, you find that there's a lot of holes, there's a lot of things that are missing, that they're trying to use a little bit of kernel of truth to pull you into alignment, whereas there's less holes to see if they're not evoking as strong of an emotion, because they're just being reasonable. They're actually trying to give you their informed perspective, and they're open to contrary perspectives without attacking. So it's been an interesting lens to kind of look through situationally.
And I love that, Ken, because I think I look at a lot of traditional medicine with that eye of them trying to scare me into doing something.
Mhm.
And not to say that I'm going to go and, if they tell me I have some sort of severe illness and I should take a medication, I'm not. But I think that for a lot of things, I kind of step back and I'm like really very skeptical about the information I get and what they're trying to share. And based on, some of it is based on data, which I don't think is applicable or is too global. It's like, to me, when they always give the ranges, it's like normal men, like, and normal women. And I'm like, what is that normal?
Yeah.
What are they comparing you to? Like, what is that age range and where do you fall in that? And all that kind of stuff. I really start to like, I don't want to be told like, I don't want to, just that kind of puts my guard up. I think I start to go, okay, like, what is exactly going on here? And it's much
Well, I
more
hear,
like of curious, out of curiosity. Like, it's really
yeah, yeah.
interesting to me. Like, what is their do they have an ulterior motive to me? And what is that? And how do I feel about that? And where am I physically to know whether I feel like that fits for me?
Yeah.
That's so funny. I literally, like an hour and a half ago, I had a conversation with a direct primary care physician that I think I'm going to start going to. And the conversation was exactly that. It was he's not too far. He said there is a place for holistic homeopathic. There's also, you don't want to disqualify, traditional Western practices either. They may be necessary. It should be a conversation between the patient and the physician about what makes the most sense based on where you are and what you're looking to accomplish, the context of it. And I was like, I think I finally found a doctor. So, and it was interesting because I've talked to functional practitioners who I would not go to, who are like, oh, it's big pharma. They start all of that stuff. And it's not that they're wrong, it's that it's a judgment that evokes that strong kind of emotion about this is all bad, and then they've got, their website looks like a freaking NASCAR race thing because it's got all of these supplements, that they're prescribing instead. So it's too far the other way,
Hmm.
so, and this guy was like, he he was moderate and open to what makes sense without having to justify anything. It was, we have a conversation and we discuss what's best. And, and it's funny, like within the conversation, within 10 minutes, there were 3 books that I mentioned that he wrote down. He's like, I want to research a little bit more about that. That's kind of interesting. I've got several patients I think would like this information. So he's not the know all be all. He was curious and open to conversation. And I think it's going to be a very, very fulfilling relationship for both of us. So, but it's exactly what you're talking about. It's like that's to me the real that's what we need to find more of. You know.
We just got a new doctor. Our doctor of 30 some odd years retired 2 months ago, and so we've got this wonderful woman from Argentina, and the same kind of low key, with what you're describing, we could look into this or this, and have you considered a diet change? Have you considered, maybe some exercise here with, being able to stretch things out, or, offering all sorts of things that are not coming from big pharma, and all at the same time being they're all ists these days, right? And they all work for a living, and they don't have to pay their own malpractice insurance any longer because no one can afford that. But the neat part of it is that she's got a very interesting way of being that's quite different than our experience of doctors, older doctors, especially down in Florida, which is, tell me, where it hurts. Oh, you've got this, and we're going to put you immediately, with a prescription for that, and that didn't work after 6 days. Oh, well, no, then you must have this, and so you play that game for about 2 or 3 months, and you're still not any better, but suddenly you're over it, right?
Mhm.
As opposed to somebody who takes the time to sit and ask a more fundamental question. Don't tell me where it hurts. Tell me what you did for it to hurt.
Mm.
That sort of a thing. So
Yeah, I think that one of my key things when I did switch doctors, and part of that was when I moved, was finally to go to somebody who believed that nutrition mattered.
Mhm. Yeah.
And because I've been in, the more traditional world for a long time, and nutrition plays so little, least when I was working and in the field directly, nutrition played very little role in health as far as they were concerned. And
Yeah.
not believing that at all, like not understanding that, like how could that be? And feeling it, like knowing it in myself, and then just saying, well, this just does, like, that's one of the things where you sit there and you really start to look at it for yourself, and you're like, this just doesn't feel right. Like, how that just does not make sense.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
And realizing that, as far as you're concerned, Ken and Bill, is finding those doctors or people that you can that you feel as you can have a relationship with, who will be an advocate, let's say, for
we
you.
like their narrative. In other words,
Right.
it all comes down to, this has been missing from my life for a while, and it's an amazing experience to speak with somebody who's in the medical uh, business, who's not interested in just kind of slapping you on the rear end and getting you on the road with a prescription.
Well, and sometimes it takes being open to, now we're back to, are you willing to let your truth be changed? So, like, the whole idea behind direct primary care, this is a subscription service. Your insurance does not cover it.
Mhm.
So it's not that you don't, you should probably have insurance for catastrophic things, but there's no copays or anything like that. You pay a monthly fee. And
Mhm.
then if you need tests and stuff, you have to decide, there's going to be an out of pocket cost for that,
Yeah.
but generally speaking, it's significantly lower because you're not going to the insurance, which jacks everything up, because they got shareholders to satisfy. So, you know, but it's a very different model, and it's a different way of it's easier for someone like me who basically, because I've been self-employed my whole life, the amount of insurance that I have, if I ever really, really get sick, I'm going to be bankrupt anyway, because there's just our healthcare model is so screwed up. I don't have 2 grand a month to pay for healthcare coverage that would actually cover it. So my
Right.
deductible is like 12 grand a year. It's, it's like,
I'm
so
there. I'm there with you, Ken. You know?
yeah, I mean, it's so broken and, so,
Well, I think
but,
that's been my impetus, is to take as good care of myself as possible. Is that
me
I don't
too.
I don't want to have any I don't want to have anything. God, I just want to keep myself as healthy as possible, so I never really need to
Yep.
utilize that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But having an advocate that, I'm just subscribing to basically that, you can go in and visit and they help keep you healthy
Mhm.
from that medical perspective. To me, that makes a ton of sense.
Mhm.
Now you have someone that you can actually talk to instead of you. The only time you ever see them is when you think something might be wrong, and they're just going to remedy that and punt you back out the door.
Because you're not really the client.
Nope.
Services that they perform is in large respect, you just happen to be the matrix battery that's plugged in that allows them to continue doing what they're doing. And the deal is increasingly in all areas, and I'm giving you a really cool narrative, but it seems like the deal is between big government and big something or other. Big insurance, big medicine, big education, big, you fill in the blanks. And the really interesting part to consider here is, are there any places in our life where you think we'll ever experience absolute, unmitigated, and unrefutable truth? Or is it all narrative?
I think for me anyway, the truth is not super relevant. It's all about the context that you build around it. So, I mean, you can use it just kind of to help you navigate, but in the end, it's kind of like the truth of how a car operates doesn't really matter if you get to take your kid to little league practice. That's what actually matters. The truth of the car is relevant than the functionality of it working. The only time you really notice the truth is when it breaks. now,
That's right.
now you need to know some things or get someone to fix it for you.
Yes, absolutely. That's, I think, a really good point to kind of wrap things up for today. It's been another amazing conversation. And I don't even know how we do it, but we take a word or two, and from nothing, we have this tremendous conversation. And I think it's based in respect and love. And I think that that's not a bad place to play or operate. And before I give my final uh, in my final parting words to our listeners, do either of you have something else that you'd like to wrap up with?
I think I'm good.
Yeah, I'm
I think
good too.
I think you are too. So your homework, once again, folks at home, and also for you too, Ken and Jan, is to call someone, text someone, send an email, but be in contact with someone that you love and let them know. Let them know the world is better because they're around. It makes a difference in your own heart to know that they're out there. And I guess that's the last thing that I'd like to say today, except for go out into your lives and know that you are loved. And bye for now.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.